Welcome to Invisible No More podcast, where we stand together as a beacon of hope for those who have served our country and faced unimaginable challenges. I am Shannon Huff, your guide through stories of strength, resilience, and healing. Our mission to empower women who have faced sexual assault in the military, find their voice, reclaim their power, and rebuild their lives. Join us as we share journeys of triumph over trauma, offer support, and shine a light on the path to restoration. Together, we are a Shield of Sisters. Welcome back. This is Shield of Sisters podcast. I'm Shannon Huff, and I have Bethany with me today. We are talking about different ways to overcome trauma. We're going to talk a little bit about where Bethany's been and what she's done in her life. And I'm so grateful to have Bethany as part of our organization. She definitely adds an element that I need, a sounding board when I need someone to talk to when it's been a rough day. Just an amazing person. So, Bethany, thank you for being part of our organization. I know you've had so much go on. You haven't really gotten to come to a retreat but the things you've done have been instrumental. So I wanted to start out with a big thank you for that. So,
of course.
Yeah,
absolutely. As soon as I heard about Shield of Sisters, I knew I needed to be involved.
I find that a lot. People go, oh my gosh, I have to be part of this. That's how we found Joe, our podcast director. He's like, I just have to be part of this. So it's so important for our sisters to know that there's someone out there that understands what they've been through, that understands trauma, and that they're not alone.
Deeply important.
I think so often we feel so alone that we don't realize that, unfortunately, there's that 1 in 3 out there. And so there's a network of sisters that are here to help. So tell me a little bit about yourself, how you got to where you are today, what you do.
It is a meandering path, to be sure. And what I do now is not what I have always done. Now I'm a licensed professional counselor with the state of Wisconsin in the Department of Corrections for women who are incarcerated at Techita Correctional. But I have not always been a mental health therapist. And before I decided to pursue trauma recovery and be the person to whom others can go, I actually was employed in different ways, different places, different roles. At one point in time, I worked in an animal shelter. At another point in time, I worked overseas for the University of Leipzig in Germany as a lecturer. I've been a volunteer teacher for young girls in Palestine, and I was also a military trainer on NATO headquarters in Kabul, Afghanistan.
Wow. So animal trainer, teacher, that's how rewarding was it to teach young ladies in Palestine? I can't imagine.
Profound. And it was a life experience that, I've not thought I could have, but I found my way there and found an opportunity to reach young people in Palestine, young girls just in a village wanting to learn English. And I didn't speak Arabic, but I did the best I could to connect with them as a woman in this world. And they are young girls growing into a world that is not always kind to women. And in that case, kind to Palestinians. And so it was a multi-layered experience, and in some cases, mildly traumatic to see a way of life that I don't know.
So when we first met, it was through Techita. There's a veteran organization there, correct?
There is a veterans committee.
And sorry, it's been a while.
It has.
And they contacted me and they were like, we've chosen you to be the recipient of some funds that we're raising. And then while we were there, we met you. And I was just so excited to meet you. One of our biggest things is when we're at retreats, we like to have someone in case there's a trigger that goes further than it should, which we always try to avoid, but I was so excited that you were so interested in what we do.
Well, I got the email, Shannon, about ordering something for lunch and that all of the proceeds from all of the staff orders would then also go to the organization. So I clicked on the hyperlink in the email and I thought, well, I'm going to the gatehouse. I'm going to show up. I need to know everything about this. So I met everybody on the Veterans Committee that day.
Oh,
I had not been previously involved. This was the catalyst.
well, that makes me even happier. There's always a reason, right? That
Yeah.
little fate thing. So, as part of what you do you run into any female veterans that have experienced MST or that you work with because of trauma they experienced in the military?
I've not yet worked with someone who has gone through MST in the incarcerated setting, but I have encountered women who have served in the military. There are not many, there are a handful, and whether they disclose to me their veteran status is very much their own decision. So I suspect I have worked with veterans, past veterans, but they have not volunteered that about themselves.
Okay. I just often wonder, because MST is so traumatic, how many of us go on to do things that land us in situations like prison that we probably never would have ended up there if it hadn't been for our experiences, because sometimes our experiences mold us so much and change us into things that we normally wouldn't do or go down that path. So I'm always just kind of curious if there's been any kind of studies out there that kind of show that correlation. So
there are, to be sure. And what I've recognized over time, especially in the incarcerated setting, is that hurting people hurt people, and right, the ways in which they have been hurt compelled them indirectly or subconsciously to hurt others. And it's not necessarily what they wanted to do, the way they imagined themselves to be, but rather that they experienced so much. It was so severe. It changed them biologically and chemically. And they, when perhaps encountering a stressor, cannot regulate. And so go into fight, flight, freeze. And when our heartbeat goes up past 100, 120 beats per minute, we're not actually very good at making sound decision making anymore. Then we just become very emotional minded, and we can't think straight or compute logically in the way we would if we have a resting heart rate. We cannot know what we would do, but I can imagine that in some situations, people defend and protect and lose sight and can't really think themselves through it because it's like being hijacked.
It definitely feels that way. As a survivor, there's times I've felt, perfect word, hijacked. Like you get in a situation, and you might not actually even be in danger.
Right.
But your perception is you're in danger. And then those triggers start getting worse. And you just, it's like your whole body, you just don't know what to do with your body and you don't know what's going on.
So one of my least favorite and most applicable things that I've learned from my military experience was that perception is reality. And I can't actually say that it's not true. It's probably one of the most true things I've ever heard. That being said, if we perceive that we are in danger or that we are being threatened, that's all it takes. That becomes our reality. And if a post-traumatic stress response kicks in, the stressor will create a wave, right? And the wave is the symptoms. The symptoms take over our body physiologically. The heartbeat goes up. Our ability to think, of course, goes way down. Our thoughts race. We might begin to sweat, for example. We probably can't communicate very well in that situation either. And that's why this is a clinical diagnosis. That's why this needs to be recognized, because we are not ourselves when we have that response.
Absolutely. So I'm going to kind of go back to the things you've done, all the different career paths you've taken, job paths.
Many, Shannon.
So many. So here you are. You're in NATO headquarters, right?
I was.
Okay. As a civilian, training military?
I was a defense contractor.
Okay. What did you do? I mean, what was your experience like?
I will tell you, I had minimal experience with the exception of teaching in Palestine before I got there. And so the idea that I was 25, 26 years old and hired on as the gender integration subject matter expert for this mission was a little dubious, but it was everything I had ever wanted. And I had studied terrorism at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. This was my wheelhouse. I just could never find a way to get in. I
Mm-hmm.
had only ever gotten rejections every time I had applied for a government agency. And then suddenly, February 2015, I get an email from left field. Hey, I found your resume. Do you want to join our team? We train people here. And I identify already as a lecturer, a teacher, a trainer. Absolutely. So 2 weeks later, I was there. 25,
Wow.
26, no real boots on the ground experience with the exception of going to Palestine or going to Germany or the UK. Unafraid to travel, but definitely not in an active theater of conflict before that time. And when I got there, it was a 60-hour work week. It was 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, and training all of the incoming personnel between contractors, civilians, and uniformed military from all the contributing countries to the NATO coalition. Because there's a training requirement, you need to know where you are.
Mm-hmm.
You need to know how we facilitate this train, advise, assist mission. You need to know the framework that we've got in place. And it was based on essential functions. It was building up the ministries in Afghanistan so that their defense forces, police, army, Air Force, could sustain themselves, ideally.
So while you were there, did you experience any harassment, or see any women who were harassed, or dealt with any women who had been around and just not treated in a manner that they should have been? Yeah, our forces, not civilians.
Yes, I witnessed that. I was party to an event where there were some higher ranked individuals there, and I didn't know all of them, but I was standing around because I was invited to see whatever the ceremony was, because after what happened to me, I didn't remember actually what took place. And what it was is I happened to be standing next to a very high ranking Italian general at the time. And he looked at me and he said, "I bet you look amazing under your clothes." And I thought, what just happened?
Wow.
And what do I do in this moment? Because I'm supposed to work with you. You're supposed to work with me. I was brought here as a professional for my knowledge, my ability to stand in front of a classroom and train effectively. And you just took that away from me.
Mm-hmm.
So personally, that happened right away. I would tell you later, I had a very wolfish supervisor and moved on to another wolfish supervisor. So it's disappointing to me that you could put a uniform on someone and there's still a wolf.
Mm-hmm.
And I encountered many wolves. It's not what I was looking for. And it defined my experience over there. So the last years since my return to Northeast Wisconsin have been an effort to take back, an effort to reclaim, an effort to redefine.
Mm-hmm.
It was not the only incident, but it was the first.
It's hard when you hear stories like that. We're supposed to be, especially in a wartime situation, protecting and defending the people that we're with, and even from different nationalities where we see MST. It's so heartbreaking because you're there for such a noble reason. You were, training people and so that they could understand where they are and what they're doing, and kind of keep that, even though it's wartime, there's still ways to behave.
100%.
And you were talking about how you saw our information and went to the lunch. What about Shielded Sisters and MST in particular made you want to be part of this experience of helping our sisters who have experienced MST?
In short, because I wished I had known about it sooner to help myself better.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the span of time that's passed since my return, I've done this largely on my own. I've fumbled and I've had to pick up where I left off a couple different times and finally got into counseling myself while learning how to become a counselor and recognizing I can't become a counselor if I can't also help myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's irresponsible to be a therapist unless I've gone through that dark forest so that I am best equipped to help others get through it. I joined so ferociously, so fast, Shannon, because it matters deeply to me that this organization exists and sees those who have been through this experience,
mm-hmm.
who by definition of an MST, are not seen and are not heard, in large part.
That's amazing, because you're right. When I started this, I had to do a lot of work on myself still. But just being able to finally talk about what happened to me was huge, because I kept it such a secret for so long, from a lot of people. I mean, the person that assaulted me went to jail, but those closest to me didn't know about it. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell a lot of people what happened, because I just felt so dirty, and shameful because of my story. And it is a lot of work. There's a lot of things you have to do to work through any kind of trauma. But the betrayal of military sexual trauma, which I hate, I hate that title. I wasn't military sexual trauma. I was raped, and it's such a betrayal, and it's so violent and so just dirty.
Judith Herman actually writes about this in her book, Trauma and Recovery. It's called institutional betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
So if we put an umbrella over it, and the military is an institution among many, but where it's especially rampant, this is a norm in terms of what we know from the research. This happens in military settings. This happens to women and to men. I have encountered in a different counseling practice someone, a male, who had been through this experience, military sexual trauma, and he did not name it. He could not name it, and eventually did not come back.
Our brothers go through a whole different trauma when they experience MST, and it's excruciating for anyone to experience, but for our brothers, it's a whole different level, and it's something that we're not quite there to work on. We've got enough sisters to help.
Yes.
And I'm sure there'll be an organization come along, or we'll eventually get there. But it's hard to put a name on it. I understand why the military calls it what it does, but it's still hard. What is some of the best advice you could give to one of our sisters, or even someone just listening to the podcast that's struggling with trauma?
Name it, acknowledge it as part of what you have lived. I gave it the stiff arm for a very long time, entirely too long. And I was very proud, I was very stubborn. I was born a mule. And so it took me longer than I am proud to say out loud to say it myself and show up, because I was ready to ask for help. And in the time it took me to show up, I feel like I hurt myself more. And that's where I get more sensitive about it, because I would have liked to show up for myself better. And to the extent that I can help others be kinder to themselves in that moment and recognize that this is just something that you've lived, a part of yourself that needs to be seen, to be heard, to be understood and taken in. If we think of the trauma, if we think of what happens to us, a traumatic experience, it's a very vulnerable part of ourselves, almost like the child in us. And for those who've been through anything in their childhood, we go back to that time in our life. That's what the evidence suggests. A PTSD response for someone who's been through a lot in childhood will take us back to that age. And as an adult, it's a little bit more confounding. My reactions were adult and childlike. Like, I wasn't myself in my reactions, but I was in a kind of denial that kept me from actually helping myself. And I'm mad about that. I should have been nicer to myself. And I get to be nicer to myself now because I've done work around it. I'm not done with the work, but I have begun it. I'm probably never going to be through with it completely. It is an ongoing task every day. Like, I wake up and decide to be aware of myself, to not be afraid of what I find and what I feel, and to be able to walk myself through situations where in the past, my brain would have traveled a different neural pathway.
Yeah, absolutely.
A more destructive one. It takes a lot of awareness, and the awareness can be frightening. Do not be afraid of the awareness. It is actually the key.
That's amazing. And it sounds like, and I always tell all of our guests, you're welcome to share more of your story of what happened to you if you want. If you don't, we're fine with that. You could just say, I had experiences while I was at NATO headquarters. I had experiences while I was wherever, the branch of service. What it sounds like you went through hell.
It was not just in Afghanistan. The first instance was actually in Israel, in Tel Aviv.
Wow.
And it was years prior. And I didn't know what it was and moved through it, clearly in denial, and went to Palestine, where I was in a traumatic environment, but for different reasons. There's low-level roiling conflict there all of the time. So it didn't have to do necessarily with gender or a man threatening me so much as this is a hard place for me to exist. And it's hard for me to see my students also have to exist in a place like this with violence. And I am glad that I recognized, I was able to take a step back eventually and recognize, don't walk this path alone. Find someone, show up, move forward.
Yeah. And we talk about that a lot in our restoration process, our 6 steps, visualization, habits, your choice, power of choice. It just, every day what you choose can make a difference. I'm going to get up, I'm going to breathe today. That's your first victory every day as you get out of bed. You wake up, it's a huge victory. So we're going to come back in our next episode and talk a little bit more. I just think you have so many great tips and such an amazing spirit. And I'm so glad to have you a part of us. We thank you all for joining us for this first part of the episode with Bethany. And we'll be back in episode 9 to talk a little bit more. Thanks for joining us at Shield of Sisters. Thank you to all the members of Shield of Sisters Founder Circle. Superbio, we appreciate your continued support. If you are interested in joining our Founder Circle, please visit our website at www.shieldofsisters.org or call Shannon at 608-344-0210.